You're watching Markets at Noon on ET Now. Well, here's an interesting target that the government has put forward when it comes to vaccinations. They want 70% of the Indian population to be vaccinated by December. That's roughly 6 months from now. How achievable is this target? Can India's vaccine makers ramp up the production, the amount of vaccines that will be required to achieve this target? Let's welcome on the show Dr. V Balasubramaniam. He's the former MD of Indian Immunologicals Ltd and Life Sciences Consultant. Sir, thank you so much for taking our time today and joining us on the show. So yeah, let's talk about the feasibility of this 70% target. So far, of course, the vaccination pace has been a little slow, but as we learn from perhaps the mistakes that we made, and now as the policy as well has changed with the center procuring 75% of the vaccines, do you think that we can sort of ramp up the drive and achieve this target?
Okay, good afternoon, Mobina, and thank you very much for having me on this show. Let me preface my answer by stating that we have a very large population and we also have limited vaccine supplies. And therefore, to achieve whatever number is being stated, 70%, depends on a number of factors. First and foremost, of course, is the vaccine flow. Till May, we only had about 200 odd million doses which were supplied. And I think in this month, we would have about 110 million is what the figures that have been put out. And the government estimates that by December, they are. But I think, in my view, that's a bit optimistic. The industry people are talking about a figure of somewhere between 1 to 1.2 billion doses. Now, adding the 200 million doses which have been supplied, and I think about 24 crore vaccinations have been done, vaccine doses that is. So by end of the year, the most likely estimate is that we would have about 1.2 to 1.4 billion doses to be administered. And that represents a coverage of just about 40%. So therefore, in my view, I think while we should try to maximize the coverage to 70% or whatever that the government desires, the most likely scenario is where we could end up with about 40%. And that's because the supply flow is limited. We are only now approving the other, vaccine producers for the vaccine that they have brought up with the different technology platforms. See, the basic problem is that we have a very large population. We are fortunate to have good vaccine units which are producing these vaccines. But then the vaccine flow is not, much to our expectations. So these are the constraints that we are working with.
All right. So what do you think is needed then to make this flow of vaccines, like you mentioned, a bit more easier? I think in terms of channels, it's distributed well. Today, we have a lot of private players as well trying to vaccinate their employees, etc. So I think we have the resources. But how would, what changes would you recommend in the current distribution policy that could make distribution more effective, more seamless?
I think what's more important is what kind of coverage we are able to achieve with the first dose. That's most important because the first dose protects you against a very severe form of the disease or hospitalization. Although you may say it's only about 30 to 40% efficacy, but all the same, I think it's very important to cover as many people as possible for the first dose. And then, of course, one would have liked to have a pulse pulse mode of vaccination, but that luxury you can afford if you have enough vaccine supplies. But that not being the case, I think we have to do a staging approach. And I think the government did very well, to start the vaccination process, starting with the health workers, the high-risk frontline workers, and then the vulnerable groups, the people over 60 years, but somehow the vaccine flow got limited and there was some amount of confusion. Now, with vaccine flow improving, I think what we could do is to stage the whole thing based on the priorities. So we should look at covering even more health workers, the frontline workers, the workers at risk, the transport people, the courier people, the postal people, the other vulnerable people, because we don't have sufficient vaccines to go around. And then the virus is getting even more dangerous, the mutations. The reinfection rate is getting higher. Must have a 7% herd immunity, has now reached about 4%. And that needs about 75% herd immunity. You may well go to 80% herd immunity. So therefore, we have to stage this very carefully. And it's not an easy task. One does not envy the position of government in this, given the huge population and the resource constraints. I don't mean the financial resources, but I mean the human resources to achieve this task. The government states that they should be looking at about 10 million vaccinations per day. The best we have done is in April first week, which was about 4.2 million. And currently it's about 3 million. So we have to do that, we have to reach that. And the other issue is that we have to sustain this. We have to sustain this for a long period. The COVID vaccine is not a one-time affair. We have to do it.
Sir, just to take the point ahead, can we just say that, it will be an evolving situation? I mean, earlier we had different solutions for COVID. Now we have different protocols for COVID. Same way the vaccination, the entire process, it's an evolving process. So there will be changes even to the current process, but all of them will be done for better implementation?
Yes. But I think in terms of the supply, the criticality, I think we may have crossed the hump, and I expect a fairly better flow of vaccine with Biological E coming in, and then ramped up production of Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech. So that would get addressed, but I think we'll have to wait till November, December to reach about 200, 250 million doses per month, which is sufficient to keep the rate of vaccination at whatever level that the government decides. But, you earlier asked the question about involving the private sector. In my view, we have to involve all possible sectors in this vaccination exercise, because this is a dangerous virus. It is mutating. The casualties are heavier. You know that the death rates are higher now in the second wave, and children are more vulnerable in the next phase. So we have to ramp up the vaccination drive. That's about all. And it needs concerted effort by all people, both the public sector and private sector. That's what I would say. So yes, I agree. It has to evolve, and it has to evolve fairly fast. That's what I would like to impress,
Right, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out time for us. Always good to get perspective. On that note, out of time, taking a break. Nifty up 38 points off the day's highest point, but nevertheless absolutely flat in and around the 15,800 level.